Spooky Tuesday.
This thing, it's gonna follow you. Somebody gave it to me, and I passed it to you, back in the car. It could look like someone you know, or it could be a stranger in a crowd. Whatever helps it get close to you. It can look like anyone, but there's only one of it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Spooky Tuesday, a weekly podcast where we're breaking down all of our favorite slashers, thrillers, monster movies, and black comedies on the new scariest day of the week. I'm Sydney Thompson.
I'm Monica Height.
And I'm Chelsea Duff.
And today we're talking about the 2014 killer film, honestly. It Follows. That's what it's called. And in case you didn't know what it's about, I'm just going to do this now so we don't forget. The IMDb little thingy for this movie is a young woman is followed by an unknown supernatural force after a sexual encounter. And let me just say that I really appreciate this little IMDb synopsis or whatever for not giving anything away. It's beautiful. Not as snappy as the Mad Stabbers beat, but it does leave you knowing nothing. And that's what everyone should, that's where you should be when you go into this movie. You should not know what's going to come at you, in my opinion.
Is that true though? Because I didn't know anything going into this movie. I told you guys last time, hadn't seen it. I always confused it with Let the Right One In. I was like, I don't think it's a vampire movie. I'm surprised if it was a vampire movie. Pulled it up to watch, saw that description, and immediately was like, sexually transmitted ghost.
Well, yeah, you find that out in like the first 20 minutes. If you watch the trailer, it's pretty clear
Right,
that it's
but
something like that. Doesn't like get into how spooky it is, you know.
Sure. And I appreciate that. But as someone who was instructed to go in blind and was trying to go in blind and hadn't watched a trailer, my first note that I took was, oh, well, I'm pretty sure the Prime summary just told me that is a sexually transmitted spooky. So much for going in blind. And that was, in fact, what this movie is. So, I mean, they nailed it, but also I wish my eyes had not immediately read the words presented to me before I clicked any buttons. You know what I mean?
Yeah. From what I've read, and I read a bunch of articles about this movie, and apparently like the advertising leading up to it, because I didn't see it when it came out, I saw it a few years later, was just like very elusive, and it was just like it shows that there's some sort of sex act that occurs and then spooky things that follow it, you know. So that's kind of the vibe. That's all you
true.
know.
and I think one thing that this movie had going for it, at least based on what I read in some articles and what I saw on IMDb, is that I think technically it's like theatrical release was in 2015, but it came out at 2014 Cannes Film Festival. And so it's another one of those where like the premiere year is weird. If you heard Monica say 2014, you're like, no, it's not. Yes, it is, but it's funky. But there was like a long whisper campaign almost of like people who had seen it at Cannes and a growing organic buzz surrounding this movie that I think was more powerful than any marketing that they really did. Which is always interesting when you have the word of mouth, because originally this film was supposed to be like partly theatrical and part video on demand, or whatever VOD stands for, don't recall. And then because that like premiere theatrical weekend did so well, they decided to do an entirely theatrical release, and they kind of like scraped and adjusted their plans. So it definitely did a lot better than they were expecting. And when we get to this part later, you'll see that like critics fucking love this movie.
Oh yeah, they did.
It's truly a critical darling. In terms of audiences, they had like a more measured reaction. But what did you guys think that the first time that you saw it? Because I watched it earlier today. Like, it's still pretty fresh for me. I had enough time to read IMDb, find some articles to bounce thoughts off of, but I haven't really had time to digest it. You guys saw it a few years ago, and then I know you both watched it the other day. So give me some of your initial responses, and then the way that it sat with you.
Yeah, Sydney, how did you feel after we watched it together? Because we watched it the first time together.
So the first time I saw this movie, it was 2017. Monica,
17.
me, and Monica's boyfriend Adam went to a Fly Low Thundercat concert at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And then afterwards,
That was the day I peed on Phlilo's pee. I'll explain that later.
yes.
Anyway.
Then after that amazing concert, we were like, let's go back to Monica's house and watch a horror movie and
Makes sense. Post game.
smoke a little smoke, drink a little
Wow.
drink. And we watched the movie, it was creepy. I don't think this movie is scary, but it is like incredibly unsettling. Like everything
Yes.
about this
Yeah.
movie is like designed to make you feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I, for whatever reason, like couldn't get an Uber. And so my dumbass was like, I'm gonna walk home.
No.
I fucking forgot you did this.
Yeah. So I walked from Franklin Village in Los Angeles to Thai Town in Los Angeles, which is only about a mile away. But it was 11:30.
Nighttime.
It was 11:30 on like a Saturday, and I was
Just
like
been relaxing.
I was
in totally legal ways.
convinced. In California, it definitely was legal. Convinced that somebody was following me home, and I was like having a panic attack on the phone. I'm just like, it's coming after me.
Follows. That's fucking terrifying. I can't believe you did that, and I knew that you did that. Oh my god. Yeah, I
Sometimes
mean,
I don't make great decisions, but I survived.
Sometimes, I mean, but it's so exciting whenever I learn something about your life. I was saying that to you the other day. Anytime you give me like a little morsel, it's always such a surprising delight. There's always more to know. You know what I mean? It's such a gift to be your friend.
A gift that just keeps on giving.
it truly is a gift. And also, like, I feel that vibe where you're just like, nothing can hurt me. Everybody else gets killed on their walks home, but not me. One time I walked from the Hollywood Tower back to my apartment and I sat on the side of the road at 3 a.m. by myself for like 40 minutes, just like pondering. And I was like, this is the worst decision I've ever made. But nothing fucking happened and it was fucking fine. So whatever. But
God complex prevails.
Not a god complex, just like we give off big final girl energy, okay? Like we're gonna
yes.
survive.
Great reframe. Incredible reframe.
a beautiful reframe. Thank you, Sydney. And no thank you, Chelsea, for that mean read.
I didn't mean it to be mean because I also have one.
But yeah, I remember being deeply unsettled by this the first time I ever watched it with Sid, and then also deeply unsettled by her walk home experience. But I watched this movie actually like minutes before we recorded the What Lies Beneath episode. And so like I was trying to think about Harrison Ford during that episode, but I was like about this movie because like Sydney's absolutely right. It's just so fucking unsettling. Like there's also some like jump scary parts that like will really freak you out. But like just the concept is just a beautiful concept. It's something that you're always scared of as a woman, as any person walking alone at night. Like you second guess if that person has been following you for too long, or like if you've seen that person before, even like people's cars following you down the street, which happens a lot in LA. Love that part. Like, so it taps into a fear that you already have, and then it makes it so much fucking worse because it's like an evil demon. Oh God, it's such a good concept. But what did you feel when you watched it going in mostly blind, Chelsea?
I did have a little jumpy jump at one moment. After the whole scene with Hugh was resolved and the police and blah blah blah. And they discovered that he had used a fake name to rent a house in the city, which is a whole other level of fucked up to process in that beginning scene. But there's that moment where like the ball slams against Jamie's window, Jamie, whatever.
Yeah.
And I read, I don't remember if it was in an article or if it was on IMDb. Oh, it's on IMDb. That says a ball seems to follow the curse throughout the entire movie, blah blah blah. So the ball thing, I guess, is actually sort of important, and that it sort of guides you. I don't think it's meant to actually have anything to do with the curse, if you want to call it a curse within the film itself. I think it's just sort of meant to be a signal to the audience in its own way, like pay attention. But that's the only moment that really like scared me. But you're right. I think this movie is really unsettling in a way where they explicitly say it to you multiple different times in this movie, especially Yara, like reading off her little friend fiction, whatever.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in a sec.
Yeah, but there's like multiple quotes in this movie. Maybe the poem that the teacher's reading at one point, two different things that Yara are reading that basically say like the fear is not in what's happening. The fear is knowing that something is going to happen and you have to wait for it to happen, which is so much of the movie and is also frankly like the end of the movie. You know what I mean? The way I don't want to say too much just yet, although again, yeah, although again, you know the way that we operate on this podcast, but the way that it ends is it leaves you thinking and processing still, rather than giving you like a nicely packaged little present of a movie. And it still leaves you with that kind of lingering, you're waiting for something to happen, in a way that I think is really smart in terms of the ending, but it is also in a way that stays with you, generally speaking, where something's not happening to me right now, but in a sense I could be waiting for something bad to happen. Something could always be hanging over your head, even if you're feeling safe in the moment, even if you're doing great right now. So that is a smart, scary, shitty, sucks concept.
The demon is anxiety itself.
Okay,
Anxiety personified.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
STD, the sexually transmitted demon.
That's what it is. But I mean, this movie just packs a punch like from the very beginning. Like I had forgotten completely the opening scene for this movie, and it's just so fucking good. Like you have no idea what's going on unless you read the Prime description, in which case shit. But like it's just this girl and she runs out in the street in like pajamas and high heels, which was an exciting outfit. And she's freaking out. Everyone's like, neighbors are asking her if she's okay, but there's nothing around to provoke her. And you find she runs back inside, grabs car keys, and just starts driving. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? You have no idea. And she drives to the beach, and she's just sitting on the beach in terrible fear, calls her dad or gets a call from her dad and is like, I love you so much. Just know that I love you. And then it cuts to the next morning and her leg is backwards and the other leg is broken in half and she's just absolutely a crumpled corpse on the beach. And it's just a goddamn slap in the face. This lets you know, oh shit, even though this movie is atmospheric and slow paced, it's still gonna slap you a few times. Jesus.
I read somewhere that the color red in this movie means that like it is somewhere close.
I call it the sex ghost.
The sexy ghost? Or
I mean, maybe sometimes, but mostly just the sex ghost.
I like it as a demon for me. I got big demon energy.
Okay.
This movie is there's so many references to Halloween in this movie.
Yeah.
And some Nightmare on Elm Street too.
Yeah, like this is a clear reference to
A
a bunch of
clear reference.
Plenty.
But like actually though.
But actually, like the music in this movie, I think really helps set the like spooky, creepy. It's very synth, very John Carpenter. The first person killed in this movie is named Annie, which is the first girl killed on Halloween. Jay's real name is Jamie, which is an homage to Jamie Lee Curtis, star of Halloween. And she has a sister named Kelly, which, shocker, Jamie Lee Curtis also has a sister named Kelly.
Wow,
And-
the puzzle pieces.
The pieces are all there.
And the star is just the creepy person, like ominously walking towards you, which big Michael Myers vibes, just
Extremely,
creepishly
yeah.
walking towards
True,
you.
very true.
But totally, I hear what you're saying, Monica, as well. I mean, IMDb specifically was like the director, David Robert Mitchell, cited George A. Romero and John Carpenter as major influences. Obviously, John Carpenter of Halloween, George A. Romero of I think Night of the Living Dead and other things as well, but lots of zombie content. But I think the Nightmare on Elm Street parallel really comes in that like it's not hard to protect yourself from the monster, but what's hard is to keep it up forever. You know what I mean? In Nightmare on Elm Street, you just don't fall asleep. But eventually at some point you have
You're
to
gonna
sleep.
fall
Eventually
asleep.
at some point. In this movie, it's not
It's the
hard
same
to run
thing.
away from your little sex ghost, but at some point do you stop running? You know what I mean? Can you run your entire life? It's a waiting game.
Exactly. And that's like that quote you were just talking about. Like, you know that something is going to happen, probably, like it's pretty much inevitable. And so like this girl in the opening scene, she knows it's coming for her and it's never going to stop coming for her, so she just waits for it to happen, so it's done. Like, that's the choice that she made, because the anxiety of the monster coming for her, the demon coming for her, was too much. But yeah, also like sleep is also the enemy here. You have to sleep, and then you're usually in one place if you're asleep, unless you just get on a train. But then if the demon gets on that same train, you're fucked. Damn, that theory's out. I've been thinking of a lot of ways to get away from it.
You got
in
to
the
drive
intervening
really
days.
fast to the train first. And then once you've taken the train, then you can get on a plane. I don't know. I was like coming up with ideas as I was watching this movie, because I almost want to discuss this concept more than the movie itself. But a lot of my ideas, the director thwarted in interviews, where I was like, if you hop on a plane to another country, have sex with somebody in another country, they hop on a plane to a different country, have sex with somebody. Like if you're continent hopping, like if you're crossing oceans, you know what I mean? Does it have to walk across the bottom of the ocean? Because that's going to take a long time, baby. But then the director was like, it could get on a plane theoretically. And I have follow-up questions about that, because I think that is also complicated. But
no
if
one
it walks
can
into the
see
cargo
it-
hold, well, but it does take up physical space. You know what I mean? And planes don't
Yeah.
have a lot of physical space, but the cargo hold absolutely has a lot of empty space and would be presumably very easy for an invisible being to
And this
stroll right
guy's
into.
smart.
Because
See,
as Hugh said, it is slow, but it's not stupid.
Yes.
Exactly.
Which also, I just want to say something on that real quick. I was looking for articles and I found one Vulture interview with Quentin Tarantino.
That's what I was
about how
just
he
gonna
would
bring
fix-
up.
Yeah.
That's
and he
literally
was
what I was
like,
just about
blah,
to
blah,
bring
blah.
up.
And I was like, shut up, Quentin Tarantino. Go ahead.
No,
That's all
I
I wanted to
agreed
say is
with
shut
him.
up, Quentin.
No.
You do?
Yes, I agree with him,
Oh,
because
excuse
okay,
me.
not everything that he said. Like, I don't like.
He said there should be more feet shots in this movie, and you went, that one, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure he was
that was
thinking
a
that the
joke,
whole
but-
time, but no, but the rules don't make sense, because like, I agree. The concept of this film is that like no matter what, it's walking towards you. It's walking slowly. It's walking towards you. It can look like anyone. It can look like someone you know, which is so fucked up. It's oftentimes a nude lady. I don't know why that's a thing. That's always was fun. Does she know that nude lady? I don't think so.
One thing that I noticed is they're all in pajamas. So like I'm guessing like maybe these people sleep in the nude, so maybe that's why they're nude, but like most of these people are like in lounges sleepwear.
Maybe some of them are people who have died from the demon before.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't remember, again, article or IMDb, couldn't tell you. I think IMDb, but a lot of the people that we see being what IMDb calls the entity, sex ghost, whatever, are actors we've already seen within this movie. So like the one that gets Greg looks like Greg's mom, and like we see the girl Annie from the beginning at some point, and like the creepy little boy one is one of Jay's neighbors who's spying on her in the beginning. So a lot of them are like folded in, and so I think the ones like the tall guy, tall Annabelle's cousin, he could have been a past somebody in the line of succession. You know what I mean? And so it's I think that's a really interesting point. They could be in pajamas. Maybe they were sleeping when it caught up to them.
Which is when you're most vulnerable. And
right,
it also goes back to that whole concept like of relating this to Nightmare on Elm Street. There's that idea that like every face that you ever see in your dreams is someone that you've seen that face before, like if it's like a extra in a TV show or like a person you just passed by on the street, like your brain can't make up a face, so it like caches them or something. So I like that because it's kind of like that same idea. If it was people that you've seen before, it could just be like that weird creepy granny, like, oh, maybe she saw that granny one time 20 years ago and now she's coming back as the demon now. I don't know. I like that concept. But
okay, on the Quentin Tarantino of it all, I will say he had one point, I think, when he said with the rule breaking, I think a lot of it can be explained away in terms of the fact that like the characters can only test the rules so much to confirm what they think is true or what someone has told them is true. That doesn't necessarily mean they're right. The only one that seems to suggest was done for dramatic effect is when Hugh, and Jay are on their date in the beginning and they're playing their trade game, which I thought was a really interesting device to get you to start like working on spotting people in the background and to start observing your surroundings. I thought that was
really smart and a fun date game.
Yeah. But so they start to play this game where you look around and you inside of your brain pick somebody you would want to swap lives with, and then your little buddy has to look around and they have two chances to guess who you picked and why. And so they're playing this game and Jay has picked someone to trade with, and Hugh Jeff is looking around to see who it might be, and he guesses somebody that Jay doesn't see, and is looking in the exact same direction and just doesn't see somebody there. And then you realize later on, essentially, once you've put the pieces together, it's because it was the entity that Hugh was seeing, and that's why Jay couldn't see it yet because they hadn't smashed at that time. And presumably that person was just like standing there and not actively walking towards them. And we don't really I was gonna say we don't really see that at any other point in the movie, but that's not true because there is that scene later on when Jay's in the car and they're driving away and there's the old dude standing on the roof. So I would almost argue
dick out
that like
on the roof.
Dick out on the roof.
Dick out.
But I think when a character says like it will always be walking towards you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in motion every second of every day. It doesn't mean it can't stand still. It's just that like why would it for the most part? And so in that moment there's not really a reason that it would be standing still. So 1 point for one point for Quentin Tarantino there. But the rest I think can just be explained away as like the rules that the characters are giving us are not necessarily going to be the reality of what the rules are.
I just didn't like I agreed with Quentin Tarantino with the big pool scene where all of a sudden it was like throwing shit at her and trying to electrocute her and wouldn't go in the water and all this stuff.
But it does. Don't you think that folds into the it's not stupid? You know what I mean? Like it's not going to walk into this obvious trap.
I don't think it can die. So I don't think it can die at all. Like Okay, well, I should save this till later. But I read an article and I was like, wow, I read the ending of this movie completely differently than I guess not everyone else, but
Oh.
most other people did. Because I never thought that it died. When the blood filled up the pool, I was like, it's still not dead. There's no way that it's dead because it got shot in the neck before and it didn't fucking die. And so yeah, I don't know. I misread the whole rest of it after that, but we'll get to that later. But I just like the idea of the stalking more than I like it being like a
Aggressive.
very beefy, strong person who can yeet things into a pool. That wasn't as spooky for me. But what were you gonna say, Sydney?
So when you were talking about how like she was just standing there, or like the guy or the dick out guy on the roof.
Stick out on the
Yeah.
roof.
Stick out on the roof.
Chelsea was talking about how like one of the big jump scares of this movie is when the red ball gets thrown at the window.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it's the little boy. Is that the monster? Because we see constantly like throughout this movie, like it can't go in, it like breaks glass. So I'm like, did it try and throw the ball, but the ball didn't break the window?
That's what I was thinking for that moment too, because later on it does become the kid. And that part is so fucking spooky
Oh
when it's like
God.
broken through the bottom panel of that wooden door, and then she like gets up close to see if it's still there, which I was like, never, no, do not go up to the hole. Obviously, it's gonna come through the hole.
It's
And then
still
it's
there,
the fucking
girl.
demon version of that little shit kid who watches her in the pool. Like he already sucked because he was being creepy and watching her as she had a fun time in her above ground pool. But now he's a fucking demon.
Okay, that's a really interesting point though. Because I didn't think that at all. I thought it was just kind of like a jump scare moment, but also with the ball signifying for IMDb the curse, like that definitely is a really interesting point. It also kind of raises a question that I have, which is okay, so the setup aside from the Annie intro, which is sort of just divorced from the rest of the movie, but sort of sets up the lore
Well,
to some degree. Oh, go
I feel
ahead.
like it is connected because I feel okay. What's the boyfriend's name? Hugh.
Hugh?
Hugh.
Jeff?
Yeah. So I know that he was in town. I don't know what the timeline is. So I don't know when Annie dies versus when the beginning of the movie starts. I don't think we get any dates or anything with that. But my read on it was he was so surprised to see the woman in the yellow dress and to be stalked. And he was willing to be in a movie theater where you're sitting for 2 hours. In my mind, he had maybe already passed it on to the girl and was in a different town, changed his name because like she might be pissed, or maybe he also tied her up to tell her about what was going on, similar type of thing. And so maybe he thought he was in the clear, but then Annie is dead now, and so the monsters come to get him again. That's how I read it, but I don't know if that's true.
Well, I like that. I haven't seen anything that also said that. So if you are the first person to have that thought, I think it's a very smart thought.
Wow. I'm probably not.
But also if there are other people who've had that thought, then that verifies that you're on the right track. You did a good job. But regardless, I think that's a really interesting concept, both for how it fits in and also, you're right, why he would be so comfortable, why he would be so surprised. I think there could be something to work out with why he's okay to be at home later, other than I guess if he thought Annie was the one who was going to come after him. She's dead now. But why did I bring that up?
Or you're setting the stage for the film.
Oh, yes. so Hugh, quotes, Hugh takes Jay on this date. They go to the movies. I don't remember if it's not the same night, I don't think, but they meet up again. They smash in a random car And then
It's
he's
his
like,
car.
sure, but it's like, sorry, I didn't mean a random car. I meant a
They
random
just
spot.
found a car,
That would be wild. That would
ripped
be
open the door, just
bit of
banged.
passion. No, this kind of felt planned, and I think her sister
Yeah.
had asked her early in the movie, like, "You gonna smash?" And she was like, "Maybe, I don't know." But so they smash in a car in this like random area by what may or may not be an abandoned apartment complex, parking lot, something. It looks different from the outside than how it looks on the inside. So I'm not sure what the deal is. But while they're outside, after they smash, he's like, "Oh, let me just do a little clear reference to what lies beneath, and I'll put a little cloth over your mouth with some chemicals on it." This one, unlike the clip from CSI that Sydney shared on our Instagram story this week, was not halothane, a dissociative agent, but was in fact probably chloroform,
Yeah.
because it knocked her out. She didn't just freeze within her body or whatever. But when she wakes up,
Oh, sorry. Before we move past it, I just really love that scene and that shot as like right after they've had the coitus. And she's like in her cute little lingerie lying on the seat, and she's like talking about like high school, right? And what she thought life would be like and all this stuff. And she's playing with the flower, and you're just seeing her hand glance over the flower, and you're just completely mesmerized by this monologue that she's having. And then you see him like crawl in, and it looks like, and he kisses her back, and so it looks like it's going to be some cute thing, and you're just completely caught unawares by the chloroform rag over the mouth. I mean, I'd seen it before, so I knew it was coming, but I forgot all the lead up to it. It's just like that's the part of this movie that I really really like, is how like atmospheric it is. This director like doesn't direct this like any other horror movie I've really seen. Like in the interim scenes, just the way it's shot, it's like dreamy. That's how people refer to it. And I don't know. I think it makes the scares all the more affecting because it's like out of nowhere in a different way than a jump scare would be.
I was watching this movie with another person when I did a rewatch, and there's a really funny scene where Jay's sister and her friends are like sitting there, and one of her friends lets out this like really funny fart joke, and then it
Oh, I have
immediately
I wrote down the fart joke because it's so amazing.
It's
She
so
goes,
good.
I have an idea. And Paul's like, what? And she lifts up her ass and lets out this huge fart. And then she says, it got away. Ah.
But so like, and then the next shot is Jay getting ready for, this date at the movie theater with Hugh. And the guy I was watching it was just like, I love the shots and the colors and how it's all like, and it's foggy and it's like really atmospheric. And I'm just like, fart joke.
Oh my God. You know what? This movie has it all. It's got the atmosphere.
That's
It's got
true.
the fart joke.
It's got dicks.
It's got dicks on a roof.
out.
Yeah.
What more could you want?
I so true, bestie. But yeah, I think you're right. The chloroform moment is really surprising because I even wrote in my notes like, what is he getting from his trunk? And I already, based on the little IMDb summary, was like, this guy is gonna give her the sex ghost, and I hate that for her. Like, he's got bad judgment, blah blah blah. I already had all these feelings, but I still didn't expect him to communicate what was happening in exactly the way he did, which was to knock her out with chloroform, bind her to a wheelchair, maybe.
Yep.
It seemed
Yep,
like,
it's a wheelchair.
and then drop a ton of exposition on her, as the naked woman who apparently at that moment is his mom from later in the movie. So that's its own
Oh,
level of
God.
disturbing.
God.
It is. I did not realize that.
Yeah, but the naked woman is walking towards them, and he says, like, you can get rid of it, okay? Just sleep with someone as soon as you can. Just pass it along. If it kills you, it'll come after me. Do you understand? So he's like doing this terrible thing to her, but also I think in his brain trying to do it in the most compassionate way possible, where he's like, I am doing this so you don't he's horrifying to have sex with somebody and then have them knock you out and then wake up bound by them, in a threatening situation. You know what I mean? Obviously horrifying, but to him, he's being like, I'm wasting no time and making you understand the gravity of this situation and what your next steps need to be to keep both of us safe. Because I'm not safe unless you're safe, and you're not safe unless you keep it moving down the chain. And unfortunately gotta save my life before I prioritize yours, little babe. But so that's how it starts. And now we've had so many tangents that I don't remember again why I was setting
No,
that up.
we're just setting the scene, but like that scene, I want to talk about it because like it's obviously it's really fucked up what he did, but also like I was watching it and I was like, man, how else is he gonna get her to believe this crazy shit? He could have done it a little bit nicer, but like having her actually see it, and then that's kind of really like that's driven home that like you need to see it to believe it with Greg later on, because he, even though he's there when an attack occurs and the rest of the friend group can see that, like, even though they can't see the entity, they can't see the sex ghost, they can see that some shit is going down. Like, he still doesn't believe it, and because he doesn't believe it, he gets got. You know what I mean? So like the stakes are fucking high for the person you pass it on to, and like I don't know, it was still fucked up, but I was like, you know what, like it's a tough situation. gotta show her the ghost.
But you're right, and I think I remembered that one of the reasons I was bringing that up, and I mean maybe somebody will listen back to this episode later and be like, those two thoughts don't connect, so that she's wrong. But a thought that I am having now is that if Annie was the first person he passed it along to, and he thought he was okay and that he had passed it along and that he had at least bought more of a buffer and some time, it makes sense that he has put enough thought into how to do this again. And also now I remember one of the other thoughts that I had earlier, which is point to Quentin Tarantino. Wherever they are, probably not that far away, and that it takes like several days to get back to her again is a question in terms of this sex ghost, like motivations, its timeline, its speed. Part of his point and your point was that it's like aggressive at the end, throwing electronics into the pool as opposed to just calmly walking towards. I think you could possibly make the argument that maybe it gets frustrated after a while. Maybe it knows its purpose, you know what I mean? And who knows, maybe there is some larger lore that we don't get within the scope of this movie, because this movie hands to us these characters' experiences rather than any kind of like spooky origin. You know what I mean? This is not a sinister kind of movie where they're going to be like, here's the exact mythology that we're dealing with. It's just like not that kind of film. No, which also is really interesting. Yeah, to just be like, you have the scope of you have the scope of the characters' experiences, and that's all that you get. But maybe it does get frustrated because the longer it takes to get to you, the longer it has to wait to get to the next person. And maybe this entity's like overall goal is to get back to patient zero, whoever that may be at any given time surviving. So I'm willing to
anything else to eat.
Right, but I mean it's got to be a long line, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unless
just not in its best interest to get back to number one, because then it too shall die of starvation.
Maybe, who knows? There's maybe it just starts over, because also it do be fucking, because there's also that whole element where it's like sexually transmitted, but when it kills Annie, I sure hope it doesn't fuck her to death based on what happened with her legs, but with Greg it sure does seem to fuck him to death. And so there's that whole element as well that's really strange, that I
forgot grasp. That it was like fucking him, but it was like,
and it was his mom
it was
at that moment,
and she had a tit out, like his titty out mom was like, ooh. But
he
also
should have
like,
known when her titty was out that wasn't mom. Mom
But
maybe his
keeps her
mom.
tits in a robe.
Well, who knows what his mom does though? Maybe she does get her tits out on the reg. Maybe she's like, this is a naked household. Some households are just naked.
also,
True.
like, do we know how old this sex demon is?
No, and I
Eternally
also think
too
it's
old.
so interesting that everyone we see, for the most part, other than the way that it manifests, which raises some questions, but everyone that we know that's been affected is a teenager. And so it raises this question: Are none of these teenagers in toxic relationships with older men? You know what I mean? Like, or are those older men are feeding it back into the teenager population pool? Like, what's going on? Why isn't it branching out at all?
Yeah. I also think it's really interesting. I just had this idea where like if the sex demon needs to have these people like fucking to survive because it needs to have more bodies to feed on eventually, right? Because like the time goes in both directions. Like it has to keep they need to keep passing it on to survive, but then those people who have passed it before will eventually die, you know, depending on their age, sooner rather than later. And so like this monster maybe is extra pissed at the girl because like she is not so immediately like determined to pass it on to someone else. Like she doesn't want to do that. Even when she has the opportunity with those broskies on the speedboat, she still doesn't do it. That really confused me at first because she even swims out
Well,
there and I'm like, girl, fuck one of those guys. You'll never see him again. But you
well,
know
but
what?
but that shows like I think like this movie shows us like a very like how Jay handles it versus how Hugh/Jeff handled it,
Yeah.
where he, you know, isolated himself, like rented like a really sketchy, like rundown house, like very isolated, like passed this on to Jay without her consent, without anything, like kept this like to himself. And Jay told her friends about it, like was talking about it, like thought like swam out to the guys in the boat and was like, I can just do this. But then us, you know, she didn't. So, or maybe, in my head, I was like, what if she did and they just all died?
IMDb says it is
Immediately.
ambiguous on purpose to go with the ambiguous nature of the film, but I personally don't think that she did.
I don't
Yeah,
think she did it
I
'cause
don't
she
think
was
she did either.
crying.
Yeah.
I thought
And
at first she was crying because she did do it, but then I was like, no, she's crying because she didn't do it and she's scared. That's
But
why
then
that's what I think was happening.
But then it raises the question, like, if she had a gangbang with those three guys, like,
Okay.
which one gets
Whoever
it? The
fucked
first
her
one?
first. The
Well,
first one.
okay, here's the
But
thing.
what happens if it is a lovely bisexual gangbang and everybody's just fucking each other and you're like, who gets it?
That is
Okay,
a
yeah.
question that I have because at first, not to segment jump, but at first I was like, does this have to be like penetrative heteronormative sex? And then the director said no, it can be gay. But also then when you talk about two women having sex or two men having sex or any two people having sex, people can define that in a lot of different ways, but specifically within the gay community and specifically within the women loving women community or sapphic community or whatever term you're most comfortable with. There's a lot of discourse around how it doesn't have to be penetrative sex to be sex. And so it raises the question of like, if any sex act can communicate it, or if it does have to be like one body
Bits have
to
to
another.
touch bits, I think.
Which, not to get terribly graphic, but say that it only requires like some level of penetration and it doesn't have to be heteronormative P and V penetration. If you're finger banging two people at once simultaneously, you know what I mean? Do they both get it then? Or is it like down to the millisecond of
I think it's
whoever's
bit to
first,
bit.
you know?
I think it's got to be bit to bit. Bits to bits.
But then would just some simple humping do it? You know what I mean?
Some drumping.
Like naked.
some like dry humping.
I've got the
Bits
dry
to
humping
bits,
implies the
nude.
existence of clothes. You know what I mean?
No clothes.
Um,
Nude humping.
some
bit to bit.
frottage.
Does mutual masturbation
No.
count?
Bits to bits. Unfortunately, for lesbians, it's only transferred through scissoring, unfortunately. So
Or
we're mostly
fortunately,
safe.
maybe that's
Yeah, no,
very
fortunately,
fortunate, except
yeah.
for whoever is gonna be
Who's
chased for the rest of their
really
life.
into scissoring.
But yeah, I had questions about that remained unanswered. Although the director did say it can be gay, it absolutely can be gay, which
Okay,
you know,
good.
great.
I love
Except also
inclusive
bad.
horror.
Let's talk about the two, besides Hugh, the two other guys in this movie, which is Greg and Paul. His name's Paul, right? Like
Sweet baby Paul.
Sweet baby Paul.
Paul.
What a little infant baby boy.
We learned that Paul and Jay have some history because they had a kiss, a little innocent smooch back in the day, but then he also went around and kissed Jay's sister Kelly. So
What
you
a
know, like
slut.
Paul's a little baby slut too.
a big
Good for
hoe.
him, I
Good for
mean.
him.
But don't do
it's-
that with sisters. But anyway, he was young.
But it's really
Continue.
interesting where Greg is the neighbor who
Is hot.
yes, he's hot. But when we see
This had to be said.
when Jay gets dumped back at her house after being chloroformed by Hugh and like explain the monster, we see Jay and his mom, or not Jay, Greg and his mom like looking out the street and being like, oh, these people, like they're such a mess, or there's something like that. And then, but you see Paul, he's there with his sister. He's there. He wants to help. He, you know, she's nervous. He stays to be like, oh, I'll protect you. Bitch, from what? Like,
He is baby. He
I know.
cannot, but I love him for wanting to try.
Yeah.
but then we see like as it continues on, they're running from this monster. They find Hugh. He explains everything, and Greg sees with his eyes like shit happening and still doesn't fully believe her about like what is going
Yeah.
on. And Paul is just like, I don't know if I believe you, but like I am here for you. Like I'm gonna come up and help you with these things. And so
Well, Paul believes her, like, because he firsthand, like, before that, he just loves her. And so he's like, even ghosts, I believe in ghosts, baby. Whatever you say goes. Like, because he's loyal. And that's what we're looking for. If Sydney says the house is haunted, you believe her. Okay. We
believe
just
the house
had the
is
One Life to
haunted.
Live episode. So Paul's already in it. But then when they're on the beach after like, okay, I'll say this. Greg is a down bitch. We give him props for being like, yeah, I'll drive you in my car wherever the fuck you want to go. Cool. That's great. Especially because he doesn't believe what's going on at all. Even when, like I said earlier, he sees kind of what's happening, but he was off pissing in the bushes. So he doesn't see explicitly firsthand when the demon, the sex ghost, comes up behind Jay on the beach and pulls her hair. That was one of the scariest moments of this movie. But Paul doesn't have the liberty or even the opportunity really to have any more doubts after that, because he gets absolutely yeeted by the ghost. He gets like knocked off his feet and flies 50 feet in the air. And so yeah, he really gets it. But he's still a little baby bean. And so
But
Jay's not trying to give that to him.
no, and we see, you know, Greg and Jay runs off after the traumatic beach scene and ends up in the hospital because she crashes her car.
Yeah.
And
She crashes Greg's car.
Greg's car. But
The
then
corn. Oh, I love that scene because you could see the little corns flying over her windshield.
but while she's in the hospital, which like has to be a really scary place to be if you have this like omnipresent, like slow moving thing, because like you are tied down. Like those nurses are gonna, like doctors, they're gonna make
Yeah.
sure that you aren't going anywhere. And so
Hard to break out of a hospital.
she sleeps with Greg. And it's really interesting because it like 3 days later, Greg's like, I haven't seen anything. And you don't know if is he actually looking for anything, like, or you see like a brief like flash of him with like a bunch of girls. Has he slept with somebody like right after? So maybe he's bought some time and there's some deaths off screen that yet, like maybe like that could be why nothing showed up at his house for 3 days. And
Well, also they left the ghost. They had driven really far away, right, to wherever that was that they went to. So maybe
Yeah.
it just took him a long time to
To
get
get
back. He got
back.
thrown off the trail because they went to some hospital, you know.
And also, kind of what I mentioned earlier is that it seems like I don't remember the timeline exactly either, or what they said, but also based on some maybe an IMDb trivia or something. Again, I read later. It seems like it took a couple of days for Jay to have that first appearance as well, because after the whole Hugh chloroform debacle. I think other characters say something like she's just been hiding in her room for the most part. So it seems like there is maybe something of a grace period to some degree. Like maybe when we first see the entity, when Hugh and Jay are in the parking garage, maybe it's not there for Jay yet because it hasn't fully caught on to the transmission. Maybe it was primarily there for Hugh in that moment, and it has an adjustment period of 3 days. Who knows? Like maybe it took 3 days to start to go after Jay, and it also took 3 days to start to go after Greg, but they don't know the rules because Jay was clued in so immediately by Hugh Jeff, that it seems like somehow Greg doesn't buy into it anyway. So Greg is not really, he's like kind of aware maybe, but he's not on that level of paranoia
cool.
and on high alert the way that Jay is. You know what I mean? And even she doesn't notice some people at points in the movie. So there's also like sometimes you miss things, you know what I mean? Maybe he's just a guy who's on the go. But I do think that Greg a little bit gets a bad rap in some of the articles that I've seen, where they kind of talk about the metaphor of what this experience is, and I'll loop back around to that later, but how it is not consensual when Hugh gives it to Jay. It is consensual when Jay gives it to Greg, but Greg doesn't have an appreciation for what he's signing on for.
Yeah.
It is consensual when she gives it to Paul. Paul absolutely has an appreciation of what he's signing on for. I think Greg, like you said, he's a down bitch, but there are, I think, some limits to that, and I think he just didn't understand what I think on some level he was treating this symptom rather than the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm doing what I can to make my friend Jay feel better, but I'm not trying to save her life because I don't really think that her life is in danger.
Exactly. He thinks, well, first of all, he thinks that like, okay, she's having a hard time, and if she thinks this is gonna make her better and make everything better, then I'll do this for her. Which was confusing because he was kind of I didn't expect that necessarily because he had been kind of flirting with her sister earlier too, wasn't he?
Or Yara, maybe, or there was that
Yara. It was Yara. It was Yara.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very confusing to me, the relationships at play.
Yeah, the main idea and clear reference that I had after watching this movie is that Greg is to It Follows as Glenn is to A Nightmare on Elm Street. Greg is the Glenn, literally. And there's like cinematic aspects of it that tie it in too. Like, you know, we're also frustrated with Glenn the entire time in Nightmare on Elm Street because he just doesn't buy into it. He's like, okay, sure, I'll help you. But like, he doesn't like care enough to stay awake. He doesn't like listen to anything that Nancy tells him. Like he doesn't believe about this like this crazy man who comes and kills you in your dreams. And then he fucking dies in his bedroom in a tornado of blood. Excuse me, a geyser of blood. So but there's so many parallels to this because one, I think they look alike. I think that Greg looks like 99-cent store version of Johnny Depp.
A clear
He's
reference.
still hot. He's still hot, but yeah, it's a clear reference. Also, their houses are directly across the street from each other. Our protagonist's house and his house are right across the street from each other. And like she doesn't like run into in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy doesn't run into the house to try to stop it, but like she sees it all go down from her room. She knows what's going on. So I just thought that was like a beautiful reference, and that must have been intentional, right? It had to be intentional. There's no way it wasn't intentional.
There's no
When
other
you
way.
lay it out like that, yeah, I think that would be an awfully large coincidence to be a coincidence.
Yeah, it's just there. It's like it's all there, and it's just so sad that like Jay chooses Greg to have sex with because, as she says, literally exactly in the movie, she's like, I thought that he could handle it. I thought he'd be able to defend himself because he's like, kind of a tough guy. He's got a cool car. He gives off that vibe. Unlike Paul, who gives off little baby puppy, protect him, poor little thing vibes. You know what I mean? He doesn't seem like he can pack a punch in the same way. But being prepared is what's most important, and Greg was not prepared, and so there you go. He got.
I also think though that it is she had a different relationship with Greg than she had with Paul. You know what I mean? She certainly had a sweeter, more caring relationship with Paul. I think definitely there you can make the argument, and she makes the argument that Greg is more capable of taking on this task than Paul is. I think you can also make the argument that Greg has immediate resources at his disposal that Paul doesn't have.
To fucking pass it on.
Yeah.
To fucking pass it on, but I more meant like assuming his car is not completely totaled, he has a car that he can drive away from the hospital immediately, and Paul doesn't have that.
You're like literal tangible things. I was like, yeah, Greg is way more fuckable than Paul, and so he'll be fine with passing it on.
Well, you can certainly make that argument too, because there is that whole other scene where Paul is considering passing it on, and he's driving past all of these sex workers, and I kept being like, Paul, you better fucking not, or I will personally come into the movie and throttle you, because that's really not fair. But that aside, I also think like she was more willing to put Greg's life in danger than she was willing to put Paul's life in danger. Like Greg is doing what he can, and he's being a good friend, but also it seems like to some degree, I'm not saying he's a bad person, but I think he's kind of a scummier guy on some level, you know what I mean? And so I think she just like she would not have been as comfortable at that point in the movie with the responsibility of what passing it to Paul would mean in a way that she was comfortable passing it on to Greg, who had resources, who seemed like he had a better ability to handle the situation, and who would better handle the moral weight of passing it on. Because if Paul is not only if Paul can't defend himself, but if Paul can't emotionally, let alone whether he can pull, you know what I mean? But if he can't emotionally pass it on to somebody else, then it's like he's going to get got, and then we're going to be right back to square one anyway. So you kind of need somebody who can pass it along the chain if you really are out there prepared to protect yourself and also protect the people that came before you.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Paul.
Poor
Greg though, also, yeah.
Poor Greg. He got fucked to death by a ghost version of his mom.
But here's the thing.
That's messed up.
But it's also Greg's own fault for not believing it.
Believe her.
Yeah, believe her. I'm sorry. Like, if I say something's happening, like ghosty ghost wise, and you don't believe me and you get got, it's your own fault. You should have listened to me.
Your own fault.
I think there would be more room to argue a sympathetic reading of that perspective, being like, maybe he was on guard for 3 days, and then he was like, no, we're fine, we're in the clear. But he does explicitly say to Christy at one point, like, what she thinks is happening isn't really what's happening. So
Yeah.
that is one of the few unambiguous parts of the movie where they really go,
Very
no,
clear.
no, this is the deal.
No.
So that does suck a little bit. He still didn't deserve what happened. Would he have fared differently if he followed the horror movie doctrine of like believe the person who's having the paranormal experience? But also I understand why he wouldn't, and why he would take on what he felt was something that he was happy to do. One article was like, of course he takes the opportunity to fuck the hot blonde, and I was like, that's not what's happening here. But he saw something that he could do that he thought would help like alleviate the paranoia and the fear and the trauma that Jamie was dealing with. And he was willing to do that. He just like Glenn, although I think Glenn is more of a shithead. But maybe I'm being unfair to Glenn in retrospect. I think
We shot on
he
Glenn
was-
a lot, and I think it's deserved still.
okay, good. I think he wants to help, and he's doing what is within his power to help. He didn't have a grasp of how high the stakes actually were.
Yeah. Well, okay, I feel like we need to talk about the final chapter here of this film now. Because the last like action scene of this movie, there's just so many references here, and like the fact that they go to like an old, I don't know if it's an old broken down, but like an old like pool hall, or not pool hall. Fuck. The fact that they go to an like old public pool really gave me Jennifer's body vibes. Like that was the energy that I was feeling. I was like, oh, I love a final showdown in a body of water.
And there's many a body of water in this film.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But this plan that they had, like, I get it. The plan was okay. But also
the
there
plan
are
was
so
bad.
many ways for it to go wrong. So many ways.
I even love that the director of this called it a Scooby-Doo plan.
Yeah.
Like,
they were like,
the plan itself.
it.
The plan itself. At first, I thought they were doing like a Fear Street. You know what I mean? With Fear Street Part 1, 1994, where they're like, to break the curse, she has to die, but then we'll bring her back to life. Like that's what I thought they were doing in this one. It's not. But their plan is to put Jay in the middle of a pool, have some electronics plugged in, surround the pool.
Ancient electronics.
You know, can't go wrong
oldest
there.
electronics you've ever seen. And somehow, what was the plan? To just get Jay out of the water really, really fast and then electrocute it?
Yeah,
God.
Essentially, yeah. They were just like,
There's nothing
what
that will make this work?
how could we possibly kill the entity? Our best bet is to lure the sex ghost into the water, get Jay out of the water, throw in 47 toasters and hair dryers, and hope for the best. And
the answer is electricity. Like, okay.
yeah. And the director literally said in an interview, it's the stupidest plan ever. And he kind of is just like, they're teenagers and they don't know things and they're a little dumb. And so this is not necessarily a good horror movie plan, but this is a plan realistic to what is within the character's ability to come up with. Which again, I think is really interesting in terms of the whole movie being set to the scope of the character's experience rather than like an origin film. You know what I mean? And so I think it makes sense that they do come up with something stupid that is never going to work. Although perhaps you could argue it is a little narratively unsatisfying.
Yeah. I thought,
but it doesn't work.
This is where
obviously.
the movie like lost me a little bit. Like it got me back. Don't worry, it got me back. I felt good again at the end. But like this scene was so long, and it just like I really agreed with the Tarantino article where it was just like, why is it eating things now? Why does it do this now? Why can it be shot in the head now? I don't understand. Like, how can it die? And so did you guys think it died?
No.
I
But
didn't think it
no.
died either.
And
I thought it got shot in the head earlier, actually, and you said it got shot in the neck, and you're
got shot in
probably
the
right.
neck, yeah.
But I thought they like explicitly knew that it couldn't survive being it, or it would bounce back immediately from being shot in the head. But they were just like, well, maybe I don't know, but this
Maybe
is what
if we
the
shoot
deal
it
is,
and
we gotta
electrocute it.
we gotta move forward with what we have anyway. We gotta just throw some things at the wall, see what sticks. This one didn't stick, but now we know. But yeah, I didn't for a second think that the big bad was dealt with.
Okay, good.
No.
Yeah. Because
But-
I read this article. Okay, well, before that, I do want to say that, like, let's just take a moment to talk about how stupid it is to shoot at something that's invisible when you can still see with your eyes that your friend Yara is directly where you're shooting, and then you shoot her in the leg. I was like, you guys, you're just like, that's still a gun. Like, you're still shooting a gun at your friend at this point.
But also, like, how fucked up is it that it takes the form of Jay and Kelly's dead dad in the final thing?
Oh yeah. Also, I think I called her
And-
Christy earlier. Is it Kelly?
It's Kelly.
It's
Okay.
Kelly.
But it takes the form of the dead dad, and Kelly is like, what does it look like? Who does it look like? And Jay like would not say that it looks like their dead dad, which parents are like nowhere besides
Oh my
Greg's
god.
Yes.
mom. But
That's what Adam was saying. He's like, that's
and
another one
Jeff's
of those
mom.
movies where you're like, does
Yes.
anyone have an adult?
well, that's
and
a
you
big
know what?
horror thing.
Yeah.
The thing in horror, like parents hinder the plot. Okay, like
Yeah, we don't want
But-
them around.
But like I was reading something and it was talking about how they think their dad committed suicide and the mom is drinking, and every time we do see the mom,
Huh.
she is with some kind of alcohol bottle
Oh,
with her.
God.
And that's what one of the reasons why she's like not present.
Interesting.
Damn. It
Yeah, I
do
mean,
get
I
more and more sad. That's awful.
on IMDb it also said pretty much whenever you see the mom, she's like obscured in some way. Like she's just this much off screen, so you can't really see her face, or like she's just this much wherever. That she's not quite in frame. And I think on some level that is part of the dreamscape of it all, and they did a lot to very deliberately create this dreamscape atmosphere by making everybody's clothing really all over the place so that it's not clearly one time of year or one season. And the technology, like all the old hair dryers and stuff like that at the end, all the technology throughout the film is really from a bunch of different eras.
Yeah,
Like
and then
Annie
you
has
have
a cell
the
phone in the beginning. Yeah, there's a bunch of
and
different
there's
Right.
the
things you can't-
future clam thing. Like, what is
whatever
that?
the clam is.
Whatever.
Yeah,
What is the
it's
clam? It's the clam
um,
Kindle.
And
Yeah,
it
and
is a
it's-
flashlight. So
and it's like the cars are from all different times too. So the director really tries to create this atmosphere that can't be tied to a specific time
or a specific season, because you
or
see
a
them
specific
swimming
season.
and it's based in Detroit, which I find very
Yeah, he does
it's-
set it in a specific place, which is funny.
Which-
He
which
says
I
you'll
do
get
find-
one aspect of the setting.
but here's the thing too, because it's in Detroit and because we know like what happened in Detroit, and we do see like a lot of dilapidated buildings and things like that.
That's
it-
actually really smart.
It like doesn't like, it's like, okay, like this has to be in a certain time, otherwise Detroit would have been booming, like it would have been popping until
Yeah.
fairly recently. But I thought that was like really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But I did write in my notes a billion different times, where is the mom? Where is the mom?
Where is she?
So, you know.
But yeah, that final battle was super frustrating. But yeah, the reason I was so confused was this article that I read was like, oh, they finally have sex after the big battle when they think they've killed the beast, and so they're having sex, and it's not to pass on the sex ghost. It's just for love or something like that. And I was just like, No.
Is it?
Because I
Well,
think he knows that
Oh, he definitely knows.
he
That's why
knows
he's
that's why he
cruising sex
considers,
workers.
yeah, he's cruising
He's
sex workers.
but I think we see in like the final shot, they're walking down the street together holding hands, because at that point we kind of can also see that Hugh could still see the monster and Jay could still see the monster attacking Greg. So I think once you've had it, you can
Yeah,
see
you can
it
still
always.
see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now her and Paul hand in hand are like doing it together. Like they're not alone in this situation. And you know it's the monster
Which
because the monster's jacket has a little bit of red and the guy raking leaves is wearing a red shirt, which means monster.
It's the monster.
yeah, that you can see somebody
loved
walking
that
behind them and you
ending.
know, again, they're just kind of potentially just delaying the inevitable,
Yeah.
or sharing that space together. And I think that is beautiful, but also could have, I don't know. The director really, really very purposefully made so much of this film ambiguous. I guess I hesitate to say whether this film could have benefited from making clear that they knew they were doing that. You know what I mean? Because that article that you said clearly thought that they were just celebrating being the big bad. And I didn't think that that's what they were
No.
doing, but I was also like, well, why are they smashing now? And yeah, I think just like sharing that responsibility and experience is great, but also maybe Quentin Tarantino or possibly somebody else in a different article was also like, well, if they're going to smash anyway, why didn't they smash before the pool confrontation? And
says
then
that.
two people would have been able to see the monster in that scene. And that would have been
Would've
helpful.
been
But I also
very
think
helpful.
Jay at that point was like still not prepared to, especially after she did pass it on to Greg and then Greg got. I don't think she was prepared to use Paul as bait if she was already herself in danger. So I think from a character perspective, that's why that didn't happen. Although from a plot perspective, would have been much easier. But I would have liked to have a little more intentionality in the characters knowing why they're having sex and in that being communicated to the audience so that the audience knows that this is a decision they're making together, a decision that they're not taking lightly, and that it is this moment where it's kind of like you can't run forever, or you can run forever, but you'll always have to be running. But now I'm not alone.
Yeah. I also really like the scene directly after their coitus, where Paul turns to Jay and he's like, do you feel any different? And she shakes her head and she turns to him and she says, do you? And he says, no. And I think that might have been when he lost his virginity. And I thought that was like an interesting, I feel like there's a lot of themes of that in that scene, like of like the weight that's placed on virginity and how like in reality, like you don't turn into a different person afterwards. Even when you're passing a sex demon from one person to another, you're not going to feel any different afterwards. So I thought that was a fun moment.
Virginity is a social construct, etc.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there are parts of this movie like we are just saying that I aren't my favorite, but I do love the ending of this. I love that they're walking down the street hand in hand and neither of them turn around to look back as it's stalking them, and then it's just over and you're just, I know I was screaming at the TV, turn the fuck around, and they won't turn back around and you'll never find out what happens. And it's just like maddening, but I was like, curse you, director, it was good.
Yeah. I want to talk about a larger theme within this movie in the context of an article that I read, but before I do that, I also want to really quickly just share some of the quotes that they pepper throughout this movie in terms of like setting the scene for what the true horror is. One of them is a line that I really liked in terms of like being a great piece of poetry from the poetry scene at school, but also a really good thesis for the movie, which is and I'm sure it's from a real poem, but I don't know what it is, and I did not look it up, so you'll have to do that yourself if you'd like to know. But the line is, should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? Which, again, beautiful poetry line, and then also has that theme of like, do you wait for the scary thing, the bad thing, the crisis to come to you, or do you meet it head on? We see in the beginning Annie decides to meet it head on. We see other characters trying to escape it. We see at the end Paul and Jay are not necessarily waiting for it to come to them, but are simply moving forward together, and perhaps you could argue they're taking like a whatever happens approach. But there's another line. Let me see if I can find it in my notes. There's a line at the end when Yara's in the hospital room after she was shot in the leg, where she shares a story. I think it's called like The Idiot by Dostoevsky or something like that. It said on IMDb,
Yeah,
but
that's
that's not next to this part of my notes. But
It
the
is
takeaway
Idiot
from
by
that story.
Dostoevsky.
Amazing. The takeaway from that part of the story is that the most terrible agony is not dying, but knowing that you are dying soon.
Oh, I love that quote she reads in the hospital bed, though. I have it all written out, and it's beautiful. Chef's kiss. Wait, can I read the last quote because it's just so beautiful? The one that
Yes.
you're just talking about. She says, and old Dostoevsky says, when there is torture, there is pain and wounds, physical agony, and all this distracts the mind from mental suffering, so that one is tormented by the wounds until the moment of death. And the most terrible agony may not be in the wounds themselves, but in knowing for certain that within an hour, then within 10 minutes, then within half a minute, now at this very instant, your soul will leave your body and you will no longer be a person, and that this is certain. The worst thing is that it is certain. Whoo!
Chills.
Gorgeous. And
Don't
also
mind me as I have an existential crisis.
the poem that I quoted earlier from the English class is T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It turns out I did have that in my notes. So yeah, there's a lot of really great literary references here. There's a lot of really great cinematic references here. It is beautiful. It's hard to argue that it's not a beautiful movie. You know what I mean?
No, it definitely is. And it's deeper than some of the films we've covered in the past, and it's layered, and there's all of this like AP English literature woven in. So I missed a bunch of that when I first watched it. So it's cool to realize that was Dostoevsky. Not that I've read that before. I've never read that before. But this movie gives you a great little teaser of his work if you're interested.
Okay, so just one thing that I wanted to discuss before we get into our segments is kind of a larger metaphor and theme from this movie. A lot of people talk about it as like we said, a sexually transmitted demon, or a sex ghost, if you will. And so sort of the obvious metaphor is an STD, but a lot of people also read it as about sexual assault and the trauma that you live with after an assault, and how that stays with you, and how that paranoia stays with you, and that kind of awareness that you don't necessarily exist with the safety that you thought that you had in this world. I also, before I want to talk about that more in depth, I want to say I also think there's a lot of space for it to be an STD, in the sense of the like an intentional infection, you know what I mean? Not just catching an STD, but someone intentionally inflicting harm on you in that same way. I think kind of is that same malicious harm done, something maliciously done to your body without your consent. Not just accidental, not I knew there was a risk, but I didn't care if you were exposed, but the intentional infection, I think, can carry that same kind of weight and trauma. And I don't want to dismiss that by saying, no, it's just this one thing. But there's an article that I read on bloody Disgusting by Brendan Morrow, titled "It Follows" is not about STDs, it's about life as a sexual assault survivor. That's a really, really good read, and that also talks about how this movie is pretty good about victim blaming, in the sense that it never, there's the trope in horror movies of like, if you have sex you die, only the virgin gets to live, especially for final girls, and we see that in like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, whether or not those were the messages the directors intended to put in those movies. That's certainly the pop culture takeaway for a lot of people, and that's not the case here, because Jay makes it at least to the end of the film, you know what I mean? And Jay was not a virgin going in, and is certainly not a virgin by the end of the movie, and neither is Paul. And so it already inherently like takes away that step from, if you behave this way, you're gonna get whatever happens to you, which is great. But also I think it is a really powerful and potent metaphor for, even though the sexual experience itself was consensual, there was not an informed consent, you know what I mean? Your boundaries are still being violated in this way. Even if you thought you consented to what was happening, you didn't have the ability to. And just the way that it kind of reforms your worldview and sticks with you. I mean, I can't speak to that from experience, thank God, but I think that is something that survivors talk about a lot, and I think it is really well done in this movie, and it is a conversation that is sort of delicately had, and I think I don't know, it seems like that has been powerful for people to see, and so I think that's great.
No, I didn't read this article, but I've heard that argument been made, like, just through the press from this movie, and that's why this movie is so sticking and so moving, is because it really, people can see many of their own personal experiences in it, and that feeling of something following you for the rest of your life, just that idea in and of itself. So
yes, yeah, that, but also in the sense of like, you can scan a crowd and not know who there is waiting to harm you, you know what I mean? Like it's
totally.
not just that you have this trauma that you carry with you, but also that now you are forever on the lookout, that I think is some people who haven't experienced sexual assault maybe don't understand, that the full weight of the repercussions, that, and the full weight of the experience that comes with that, and so I think that is done really well, but yeah, I would recommend reading that article if you like this movie, if you haven't really considered that perspective. I thought it was a good read.
As a survivor myself, I like that, like that lens of seeing it that way. Like, I read this article, I didn't pick that up the first time I watched it, and then before when we decided we were going to do this movie, I started like reading more articles and like scouring the Reddit and all that kind of stuff, which is what I normally do, and I came across the exact same article that you did, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then watching it from that lens, you were like, fuck.
It is
Yeah.
much more grim.
It is.
Oh,
It's
really?
certainly
Yes, it
more
is.
terrible. Certainly sucks in a different way. But it is good. Anyway, how movies could be gayer. There was one moment in this movie where I wrote gay in my notes, and then it turns out that Jay was not having a flirty moment with one of the other girls. She was in fact having an annoying sibling moment with her sister. So I had to take it back.
Been there, honey. Been there with 47 meters down. So
But yeah, how could this movie be gayer? Do you guys have any ideas? Because I don't right now.
not with the cast of characters. I mean, they just have to, like, maybe Yara's the one who's been pining after Jay her whole life, and then you can switch it that way. That would have been fun. But
or Yara and Kelly are dating, And
Cute.
like Paul is like the
Cute.
fun third wheel of that little group. I
Or
think that
Paul can be how I read him at the beginning, which was gay. I read him. I was like, oh, it's the gay best
Yes,
friend.
You mean
And then I was
Wink?
like, oh, I frankly read it wrong. I read
Yeah,
it very wrong.
I read a lot of things wrong. At the beginning, I was like, is this a group home? Like, who are these people to each other? I did not understand.
Is this a group home?
Well, there's no
Group home.
parents around.
Well, I was like, who knows? There's one adult that we see for 5 seconds. Maybe she's, I don't know. But I caught on. But yeah, I think Kelly and Yara actually is very interesting to me because Yara got almost nothing to do in this movie other than read fan fiction on her little phone and get shot in the leg. You know what I mean? She just was there to drop some
There's
quotes
a
on
fucking
ya.
term. There's a term for what her character is. I took like a film class, and it's just like the character that's just there to like spout like things to make you think about the themes of the movie. I don't know what it is. I'll Google it and we'll post it on Instagram. I don't fucking know.
She kind of fills the same narrative role as like Randy and Scream in some sense where she's just meant to like reflect the film back to the audience in a way that the audience can understand. So that I think is not a way that this movie could be gayer. But is other movie talk. But yeah, I think Kelly and Yara would be cute. You would not have to change literally anything in the plot whatsoever. There's already space for it. It would give both of those characters a little more shine. I'm all on board for that.
The only thing you would change is when Greg is like a little bit flirty with Kelly, then like her and Yara could have been like, no, what the fuck? Leave
We're
us
fucking.
alone.
What? Yeah, this is
Like,
not
and
about
I would have loved that little like tidbit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But okay, we have to ask the question though, where could Matthew Lillard fit into this film?
He
And
is from Michigan.
Whoa. I wish that he was just one of the sex ghost iterations.
You mean
Like it's just like
guy-
anyone that you'd ever seen before. Oh yeah, no, yeah, the dick out guy on the roof. Is
Yeah,
that
the
what you were
roof.
gonna say? Yeah, that would have been funny. But like it would be hilarious. Respectfully. It would be hilarious though if like they would have made this more of a horror comedy. If like it could just be anyone you've ever seen before.
And it's
so
like
it could
celebrities.
be yeah, it could be
It really is
celebrities, like
Matthew Lillard. They're like, is that
Selena
Matthew
Gomez,
Lillard?
Martin
is-
Short,
But here's
Steve
the thing.
Martin, Selena Gomez, and Matthew Lillard are stalking you
Here's
down
the
the
thing.
street.
If Matthew Lillard was like creepishly walking slowly at me, I would have been immediately murdered. I'd be like,
I would have
do it.
You'd stop and stare. Yeah.
beelined right up to I would have walked right up and been like, hello, sir. And then he would have sucked out my whole face, apparently, and turned me into a gray ghost, like what happens to Greg. Poor Greg. But yeah, I really would that's the place for him. He could do a strutting walk like that. I know he can.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that young Matthew Lillard could effectively portray a sympathetic Hugh/Jeff. I think he would be best suited to being one of the sex ghosts, but I also think it would be so distracting to have him as one of the sex ghosts. You know what I mean? I think part of what's great about this movie is that while people in it have done other things, for the most part, you don't recognize anyone from anybody else. Like Greg, he was in an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. with Clark Gregg, clear reference to What Lies Beneath. And he also was in Don't Breathe, which I've seen, and I didn't recognize him. You know what I mean? I think he just looks enough like a guy, handsome, but like a normal guy. The Atypical Kid was the only one that I recognized, and even that is not, I think, a show that is so everywhere. I think something that was great about this movie was, for the most part, that nobody really stood out as like a celebrity figure drawing attention in that way. And so I think Matthew Lillard in this movie would kind of take away, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that about it. It feels more real because you're like, I've never seen any of these bitches before in my life, and I love them now.
Yeah. That brings up, Sydney, would you like to do it?
Yeah, I want to do it. Chelsea?
Excuse me. I saw you open your mouth, but my words were already coming out, and then I had to suck them back in.
Okay, so a dumb bitch.
A dumb
Who
bitch.
should it be?
It's hard for this
Uh,
one.
Part of me wants to say Greg for not believing,
For the Glenn of it all.
Yeah, like if
Yeah.
you're not gonna, as somebody who's very adamant of like, you must believe me when I tell you something spooky is going on. As soon as Greg was like, whatever, I was like, dumb bitch, you're gonna get killed. And he did. And he did for being literally
he did.
stupid.
I was like, the all of the evidence was right in front of your fucking face. Like, if it was just Jay who believed it, you know, he should still believe her. But we also got Yara and Kelly and Paul. They all saw everyone get yeeted and a ghost pull Jay's hair. Like, that's a lot of evidence there if you're not going to just believe the person in the first place. So you're
Yeah.
an idiot.
I think that's the most compelling point in Greg's favor, because again, like I was saying earlier, I actually think if you don't believe but you are willing to do what is within your power to help, that is like kind of kind in its own way, you know what I mean? But I think that everybody else got on board and Greg was still so dismissive of it. That's dumb bitch behavior. I also
Dumb
think
bitch behavior.
I'm so inclined to say that Hugh is a dumb bitch because Hugh is doing this all so non-consensually. But also Hugh has been so intentional and has come up with so many clever plans that I don't want to let him off the hook for what he does to Jay, but I want to let him off the dumb bitch hook. You know what I mean?
Well, and also too, like,
He's a victim.
He's a victim.
Mhm.
And so while what he did was not cash money at all, not chill, like
Not cash money.
Certainly
No,
not cash
not
money.
cash money.
Really not cash money.
Like, he's still a victim and had to, you know, do something.
Maybe do this twice.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
he's had to, like, he's clearly gone through it. So
Yeah.
again, I think it is, what's his name? Greg.
Yeah, I think it's
Greg.
gotta be Greg.
It's got to be Greg. Okay, well, that brings us to our knives out of 5. So, Chelsea, set the scene. Let us know. I know this was a critical darling. So what
Yes,
did they say?
yeah. Well, I don't know what they said in terms of quotes, but I can tell you that on Rotten Tomatoes, It Follows has 95% fresh from critics, which is pretty insane. And then comparatively from audiences, it has a still fresh rating, but much lower at 66% fresh. And then on IMDb, it has 6.8 out of 10. So audiences, for the most part, maybe didn't get it, or maybe they didn't like that it was so off the normal formula of like explaining to you what's going on and leaving you with clear answers and tying things up with a tidy bow, or explicitly leaving space for a sequel. You know what I mean? It didn't quite do any of that. It kind of walked its own line. And while the actress has said that she would love to do a sequel, I think the director has made pretty clear that that's not really a
That's
project he's
never gonna
interested in
happen.
pursuing. So I do think that leaves this film kind of in a limbo where I can see why a lot of audiences would be like, it was good, but I'm not thrilled with it. But where critics would say it's actually really interesting that he did it in this way, that he constructed it in this way, that he gives you just this character's experience, just this character's knowledge, just this character's story, and that's all that you have, and you have to live with it. And sometimes the plans are stupid because sometimes kids are stupid, and it's realistic to the characters rather than what an audience member is going to want from a film. And I think that is a really interesting and valid way of telling a story. But also, was it narratively satisfying? You know what I mean? I also think there's space to be like, no, not for me. For me personally, I think that I would watch it a second time now, knowing the full scope of the movie and being on more. I don't think that there was like much that I didn't understand the first time around, you know what I mean, other than like I didn't get the setup in the beginning. And I think your idea for how Annie ties in is like really great, and I love it, and I'm 100% accepting that now, whatever anything else. And that makes a lot more sense to me. But that aside, I don't think this is the kind of film where like you need a second viewing to understand the setup or the foreshadowing at all. I think it kind of is giving it to you as you're going. But I do think that I would like to watch it a second time to better appreciate it. That said, while I thought it was great and I thought it was really interesting, I didn't think it was like particularly scary in the moment, and I didn't think it was particularly fun. But I do think that it was good. So I'm like, I want to give it like 4 knives out of 5, but it's not like super enthusiastic, to be honest.
Fair. I love this movie because it's hard. I like to watch a movie that's fun and I have a good time and I'm like, ooh, scary, yeah. This one is not that. It's super not that. It's slow moving. It's atmospheric. There are some action scenes. There's bouncy balls slamming into windows. Big spooky. There's a leg that goes backwards. There's a sexy mom who attacks her son. There's lots of scary things that happen, but there's a lot of atmosphere in between. But that said, I loved that. I love the way it was shot. I loved how it was slow moving and it made you think. I loved that there was this like, I'll never remember the word for this film term, but like this woman who had this little Yara with her little clamshell, like reading you thought-provoking quotes throughout. Like it was so, it was very true to life because it was so slow moving and the actors looked like real people and all of that. But also it was like hyper real because there were these like poignant things being said, like to just point you in the right direction throughout. I don't know. I feel like this is definitely like an art piece, this film, more so than some of the other films that we've watched. And so like it's not the classic horror, but I really, really, really liked it. And even though that pool scene makes me want to punch myself in the face, I still want to give this a 4.5 out of 5 knives because they did something cool. They did something different. And I'm so fucking glad there's no sequel. That would have ruined it for me.
Uh-oh.
Cindy, what do you think?
Uh-oh. What?
I'm giving this a 3.5 out of 5.
That's fine.
Knives. This was my second time watching it, and I had a better time with it the first time. I don't know if it was because I was watching it with like a different setting or like just I don't
With
know.
a friend?
Like, I watched the second time with a friend, but
That's true.
I wasn't as interested and as invested in it this time, and I was watching it a little bit more critically, and I was just like, I don't ever have to see this movie again.
Yeah,
like, I've seen it twice. I never have to see it again.
I think it's really a smart film. I don't know that it's a film that sucks you in. You know what I mean? Like the concept of having to be on high alert for literally the rest of your life, knowing like those quotes saying, like, do you wait for death to come when you know that it is coming and you know that it is coming soon, but not this moment? Do you meet it head on? Do you try to stave it off? Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting question to ask. But again, I don't know that this movie like grabs you in the same way that it is a smart film and a question to ponder, but I'm not going to put it on at a party ever. You know what I mean?
So I would put it on at a party, like as background, like with no noise,
yeah,
or
yeah.
like the
I always
aesthetic,
okay.
like
At my
background
horror-
like that.
At all my Halloween parties, I always put a horror movie on the screen and I turn the sound off and play like Monster Mash on repeat. And so this would be really good for that. It would be great. And
Right,
it won't
like-
suck you in too much like when I played Teeth and no one hung out at the party and they just watched Teeth.
You
It
mean when
ruined the party?
When I was like, we should watch Teeth, and Monica was like, no, and I'm like, it'll be fun, and then everybody actually watched it.
I even turned off the sound. I turned off the sound because no one was hanging out. And I turned on the Ghostbusters theme song and everyone still stayed. Fucking watched it with no sound while Ghostbusters was blasting because they were so riveted by it. God damn.
Yeah. I think
Don't
if you
do that
put
one at your party.
If you put this on
It's the why.
silent at a party, it's just like a very lovely atmospheric screensaver. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a moving picture frame. Beautiful, stunning, adds to the atmosphere. Not a movie.
No.
Without sound. But it's a movie in real life, and I like it.
It is a movie. It sure is a movie, and I also liked it. But the movie that we're doing next week is really a movie and is
Oh,
really
yeah.
fun. And we watched this maybe about this time last year with our OG Spooky crew. I'm not sure exactly when we watched it, but I'm so excited to do it again and to really discuss it this time and not just be sending messages as we watch films, although obviously I love when we do that. But to really get into it, it is kind of from the Scream era and was trying to be the next Scream, and for whatever reason it just like fell through the cracks of Hollywood. But it is The Faculty, and it is a really truly insane, crazy 90s film with an equally stacked cast. Like I said, really
So
was trying
stacked.
to be what Scream was, but for some reason just didn't quite hit the same. And I'm excited to revisit. I'm excited to discuss. So that's what is coming up.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, watch it because it's fucking worth it.
It's wild.
Ready.
So if you like what you heard, why not rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts? It'll be your mitzvah for the week. So think about it. Also, if you want more of all of this, but on your phone, follow us at spooky_Tuesday on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. I think that's it. And also, we're Spooky Tuesday Pod on Tumblr and Facebook, and we are populating all of our reviews on Letterboxd. So check us out there at Spooky Tuesday.
Bye, spookies.
Bye.
Spooky Tuesday was created by Monica Haidt, Sydney Thompson, and Chelsea Duff, and edited by Sydney Thompson. Our gorgeously spooky tunes are all thanks to Tamra Simons, who you can follow on Instagram at Captain Tamra, and our podcast art is by Mary Murphy, who you can find on Instagram at the_moon_OMG.
Do you feel any different?
Do you?